cargo ship sitting dead in the water, somewhere in international waters off the coast of Venezuela. It's 2019. The crew is on deck, unarmed, watching as a United States Navy vessel closes in from 300 meters out. There's no gunfire, no missiles, no boarding ladders thrown over the rail. Instead, what happens next sounds like something out of a science fiction movie. A high-pitched tone cuts through the air, sharp, piercing, impossible to ignore. It doesn't cause permanent damage. It doesn't kill. But it does one thing extremely well. It makes you want to leave. Immediately. This is not a weapon you see in Call of Duty. This is not something that gets headlines. But it is one of the most important tactical tools the United States Navy has deployed in the last 20 years. It is called an LRAD, long-range acoustic device. Some people call it a sonic weapon. Others call it a sound cannon. The Navy calls it a non-lethal deterrent. But in practice, it is something much more valuable than that. It is a tool that lets you win without firing a shot. And in situations like the Venezuelan standoff, where geopolitics, international law, and the threat of escalation all collide, that capability is worth more than a missile. Let me explain why. Venezuela, by 2019, had become a powder keg. The Maduro regime was collapsing under sanctions, inflation, and internal unrest. The United States had recognized opposition leader Juan Guaido as the legitimate president. Russia and China were backing Maduro. And in the middle of all this, smuggling networks were running rampant, moving drugs, arms, and people through the Caribbean using commercial shipping as cover. The U.S. Navy was tasked with interdiction operations. That means stopping, inspecting, and sometimes seizing vessels suspected of illegal activity. But here's the problem. Most of those ships weren't military targets. They were cargo vessels, fishing boats, tankers, crewed by civilians, often unarmed, flying flags of convenience from countries that had no interest in getting involved. You can't just blow them out of the water. You can't board them at gunpoint without risking an international incident. And you definitely can't let them go if intelligence says they're carrying something that threatens U.S. interests or regional stability. So what do? You need a way to compel compliance without using lethal force. You need a tool that sits between shouting over a radio and shooting a warning shot across the bow. You need something that works on human psychology, not steel hulls. You need the LRAD. The long-range acoustic device was not designed as a weapon. It was designed as a communication tool. In the early 2000s, the Navy realized it needed a way to issue clear, unmistakable warnings to vessels at long range, especially after the USS Cole bombing in 2000, when a small boat packed with explosives killed 17 sailors in Yemen. The problem was simple. How do you warn off a small boat that might be hostile, might be innocent, and is closing fast in a crowded port or coastal zone? You can't open fire without knowing intent. You can't wait until the last second to make that call. And yelling through a bullhorn doesn't work past 50 meters. So the Navy contracted with a company called LRAD Corporation, later renamed Genasis, to build a device that could project intelligible voice commands over distances of up to 3 kilometers. The idea was straightforward. Mount a directional speaker array on the deck of a ship, aim it at a target, and broadcast a message so loud and so clear that there was no chance of misunderstanding. But during testing, engineers discovered something unexpected. When you focused sound into a tight beam and cranked up the volume past 150 decibels, it stopped being just a loudspeaker. It became something that caused discomfort. Not pain, not injury, but an overwhelming, instinctive urge to move away from the sound. This was not a bug. This was a feature. The LRAD works by using dozens of small transducers arranged in a flat panel. These transducers vibrate in perfect synchronization, creating a highly directional beam of sound. Unlike a regular speaker, which disperses sound in all directions, the LRAD focuses sound into a cone that can be aimed like a flashlight. Within that cone, the sound is incredibly loud. Outside it, you hear almost nothing. At maximum output, the LRAD can produce sound levels between 149 and 153 decibels at 1 meter. For context, a jet engine at takeoff is about 140 decibels. A gunshot is around 160. The LRAD sits right in that zone where the sound is physically uncomfortable but not immediately damaging if you're exposed briefly. But here's the key. Humans are wired to avoid discomfort. When you hear a sound that loud, that piercing, your body reacts. Your hands go to your ears. You turn away. You move. You don't think about it. You just do it. This is not crowd control. This is not riot suppression. This is psychological dominance delivered through sound. And in a naval interdiction scenario, where you need a crew to stop what they're doing, halt their ship, and comply with boarding procedures, it is devastatingly effective. The Venezuelan cargo ship didn't resist. The crew didn't grab weapons. They didn't try to run. They heard the warning broadcast in Spanish. Then they heard the tone, and within minutes, they complied. The boarding team climbed aboard, conducted a sweep, found what they were looking for, and detained the vessel. No shots fired. No injuries. No international incident. This is the future of naval dominance, winning without fighting. Now let me take you inside the logic of why this matters. Because this is not just about one ship or one interdiction or even one region. This is about how modern navies operate in a world where escalation is a risk, international law is a minefield, and every action is recorded, broadcast, and weaponized in the court of public opinion. The United States Navy is the most powerful naval force in human history. It operates 11 aircraft carriers, more than 80 cruisers and destroyers, and a global network of bases that allow it to project power into any ocean at any time. But that power comes with responsibility. And increasingly, that responsibility means solving problems without using lethal force. Let me explain why guns were a bad option in the Venezuelan scenario. On paper, the Navy had overwhelming firepower. A single Arleigh Burke-class destroyer carries more firepower than some entire national militaries. It has Tomahawk cruise missiles, a 5-inch deck gun, close-in weapon systems, torpedoes, and a helicopter. It can sink a cargo ship in under a minute. But should it? No, because the moment you fire on a civilian vessel, even in self-defense, you create a political crisis. You give adversaries a propaganda victory. You risk killing innocent crew members who were coerced, misled, or simply unaware of what cargo they were carrying. You trigger an investigation under international maritime law. And you turn what should be a quiet interdiction into a headline that dominates the news cycle for weeks. This is the paradox of modern military power. The more overwhelming your force, the harder it is to use it proportionally. The hammer is too big for the nail. The gun is too loud for the conversation. And in the gray zone, the space between peace and war, between law enforcement and combat, you need tools that give you options. The LRAD is one of those tools. It is non-lethal, but it is not non-coercive. It does not injure, but it does compel. It operates in a legal space that allows the Navy to use it under rules of engagement that would never permit live fire. And critically, it works on the human crew, not the ship. This is important. A cargo ship is not a threat because of its hull or its engines. It's a threat because of what the crew does with it. If you can control the crew, you control the ship. And the LRAD gives you that control without putting a single sailor at risk. But there's another layer to this, and it's one that military planners think about constantly: escalation. Every use of force is a decision point. Fire a warning shot, and the other side might fire back. Board a ship at gunpoint, and the crew might resist. Use lethal force, and you've crossed a line you can't uncross. The LRAD breaks that cycle. It allows the Navy to assert dominance without triggering a response. Here's how that plays out tactically. The Navy vessel approaches. It broadcasts a warning over the LRAD's speaker function. This is the United States Navy. You are ordered to stop your engines and prepare to be boarded. The message is loud enough to be heard over diesel engines, wind, and waves. It's clear, it's authoritative, and it's in the crew's native language. Most of the time, that's enough. The crew stops. They comply. The boarding happens without incident. But sometimes the crew doesn't stop. Maybe they're confused. Maybe they're being coerced by someone on board who has more to lose than they do. Maybe they think they can run. That's when the LRAD switches modes. The operator flips a setting, and instead of voice, the system emits a focused tone, a piercing, high-frequency sound that's unbearable at close range. The crew on deck can't ignore it. They can't think through it. They cover their ears, retreat below deck, or signal compliance. The ship stops, and the beauty of this system is that it scales. You can use it on a fishing boat with 3 crew members, or a tanker with 30. You can use it in a crowded port where gunfire would be catastrophic, or in open ocean where boarding is dangerous. You can use it when the rules of engagement say lethal force is not authorized, and you can use it when the political cost of escalation is too high. This is not science fiction. This is not experimental. The LRAD has been deployed on hundreds of U.S. Navy vessels since the mid-2000s. It's been used in anti-piracy operations off the coast of Somalia, where small boats with AK-47s would approach commercial vessels at high speed. It's been used in the Persian Gulf, where Iranian fast boats would harass U.S. warships in crowded shipping lanes. And it's been used in the Caribbean, where interdiction operations happen weekly. But it's not just the Navy. The LRAD has been adopted by Coast Guard cutters, law enforcement agencies, and even some commercial shipping companies operating in high-risk waters. It's been used at protests, at borders, and at checkpoints. And every time it's used, the same thing happens: compliance without casualties. Now, let's talk about the engineering that makes this possible. The LRAD is not magic. It's physics. Sound is pressure. When you create a pressure wave and focus it, you can direct energy over distance. The LRAD's transducer array creates a wavefront that stays coherent over hundreds of meters. That means the sound doesn't disperse the way a normal speaker would. It doesn't lose intensity as quickly. And because it's directional, the operator can target a specific area, say, the bridge of a ship, without affecting everyone else in the vicinity. The system is also modular. The Navy uses different models depending on the platform. Smaller LRAD units can be handheld or mounted on small boats. Larger units are bolted to the superstructure of destroyers and cruisers. And the newest versions integrate with the ship's targeting systems, so the operator can aim the LRAD using the same controls used for radar and weapons. This is not a gimmick. This is a precision tool. Now let me zoom out and explain what this means for the future of warfare, deterrence, and global naval strategy. Because the LRAD is not just about stopping ships. It's about redefining what control looks like in a world where military action is scrutinized, where international law is enforced selectively, and where perception matters as much as firepower. The Venezuelan interdiction was not an isolated event. It was one operation in a larger campaign to counter narcotics trafficking, arms smuggling, and sanctions evasion in the Western Hemisphere. The U.S. Navy conducts thousands of these interdictions every year. Most of them never make the news, but every single one is a test of the Navy's ability to operate in the gray zone, the space where you need to act, but you can't afford to escalate. And this is where the LRAD becomes strategically significant. It allows the Navy to maintain maritime dominance without triggering the political, legal, or diplomatic costs of lethal force. It allows commanders to make decisions in real time without waiting for authorization from higher up the chain of command. And it allows the United States to enforce international norms, freedom of navigation, anti-smuggling laws, sanctions regimes, without appearing heavy-handed or aggressive. This matters because naval power in the 21st century is not just about sinking enemy fleets. It's about controlling sea lanes, interdicting threats, protecting commerce, and projecting stability. The LRAD is a tool that does all of those things. It stops ships that need to be stopped. It protects sailors who would otherwise have to board hostile vessels at gunpoint. And it does all of this while staying within the rules of engagement and the bounds of international law. But let's be honest, the LRAD is also a psychological weapon. It works because it creates an experience that people want to avoid. It's not pain. It's not injury. It's discomfort combined with inevitability. When you're on the receiving end of an LRAD, you know 3 things immediately. The people using it have the advantage, they're not going away, and compliance is the only rational choice. This is the essence of deterrence. You don't have to destroy the enemy. You just have to make resistance pointless. And that logic applies far beyond naval interdictions. It applies to border security, where crowds need to be dispersed without live ammunition. It applies to counter-piracy, where small boats need to be warned off before they get close enough to be a threat. It applies to port security, where vessels need to be stopped before they enter restricted zones. And it applies to peer-level conflict, where escalation must be controlled even as competition intensifies. Imagine a scenario in the South China Sea. A Chinese Coast Guard vessel harasses a Philippine fishing boat inside the exclusive economic zone. A U.S. Navy destroyer is nearby, monitoring the situation. Tensions are high. Both sides are watching for any sign of aggression. The destroyer can't open fire. It would trigger a diplomatic crisis and possibly a shooting war. But it also can't do nothing. So it uses the LRAD. It broadcasts a warning. It projects a tone. The Chinese vessel backs off. The situation de-escalates. No shots fired. No casualties. No crisis. This is not hypothetical. This is the kind of scenario that plays out regularly in contested waters around the world. And the LRAD gives U.S. commanders an option between doing nothing and using lethal force. A third choice that preserves flexibility, maintains credibility, and avoids escalation. But the LRAD also has limitations. It doesn't work through walls or inside enclosed spaces. It loses effectiveness in high winds or rough seas. And it doesn't stop a determined adversary who's willing to endure the discomfort in order to achieve their objective. The LRAD is a tool, not a silver bullet. It works best when combined with other capabilities: surveillance, communication, show of force, and yes, the implicit threat of lethal action if compliance is not achieved. The Venezuelan cargo ship stopped because the crew understood the full spectrum of consequences. They heard the LRAD. They knew the U.S. Navy was serious. And they knew that if they didn't comply, the next step would not be more sound. It would be a boarding team, detention, and potential prosecution. The LRAD was the warning. The Navy's reputation was the enforcement. This is the architecture of modern coercion: layered, proportional, and decisive. Now let's talk about what happens next. The LRAD is first-generation technology. It's effective, but it's also limited by physics. Sound attenuates over distance. It requires line of sight. It doesn't work underwater or through solid barriers. So the next generation of non-lethal systems is already in development. Directed energy weapons, lasers that can disable sensors or engines, electromagnetic pulse devices that can shut down electronics, high-power microwave systems that can fry circuits without harming people. But the LRAD will remain relevant because it solves a problem that technology alone can't fix: the human factor. People respond to sound in ways they don't respond to light or electromagnetic radiation. Sound triggers instinct. It creates urgency. And in a standoff, urgency is control. The United States Navy used the LRAD to capture the Venezuelan cargo ship because it was the right tool for the mission. It was non-lethal, legally defensible, tactically effective, and strategically clean. It allowed the Navy to enforce U.S. policy without creating an international incident. It protected American sailors. And it sent a message to every smuggler, sanctions evader, and rogue operator in the Caribbean: you can run, but you will not escape. You can resist, but it will not matter. The U.S. Navy will stop you, and it will do so on its terms, not yours. This is not just about technology. This is about dominance. And dominance, in the modern era, is measured not by how much destruction you can cause, but by how effectively you can control outcomes without firing a shot. The LRAD is a sonic shield. And behind that shield, the U.S. Navy continues to operate unchallenged in every ocean on Earth.